My lawyers will be in touch with you.
Imagine this. You've just spent 14 hours in the most excruciating pain of your life. Your body has been torn apart, bringing 3 human beings into this world. 3 tiny hearts now beating because of you. You're exhausted, you're vulnerable, you're bleeding. You can barely keep your eyes open, but you did it. You're a mother now, times 3. And in this moment, as you lay there in that hospital bed, you expect the man you married, the father of these 3 miracles, to be standing beside you with tears of joy in his eyes. But that's not what happens. Instead, he walks into your recovery room with an envelope. Not flowers, not balloons, an envelope. And inside that envelope are divorce papers. He doesn't cry. He doesn't apologize. He simply hands you the papers, tells you his lawyer will be in touch, and walks out of your life forever. 45 minutes after you gave birth. But hear what makes this story different. 24 hours before he handed you those divorce papers, you signed something. Something he told you was routine hospital paperwork. Something you were too exhausted and too trusting to read carefully. Something that would turn out to be worth $23 million. And he knew it. He planned it. He waited for you to be at your most vulnerable, and he struck. So what did she sign? Why did he choose that exact moment? And how does a woman who just lost everything end up winning it all back and then some? Before we go any further into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Understand how a mother of 3 went from that hospital room to a courtroom, from complete devastation to total victory. We need to go back 7 years. Her name is Catherine Hayes, 34 years old, elementary school teacher in suburban San Diego, California. She taught 2nd grade, specializing in children with learning disabilities. Her classroom walls were covered with student artwork and motivational quotes. She remembered every student's name, every struggle, every victory. Outside of school, Catherine's life looked perfect. Beautiful craftsman home, married to Michael Hayes, a corporate attorney at one of San Diego's most prestigious law firms. They met at a friend's wedding 7 years earlier. He was charming, successful, ambitious. The proposal was perfect. The wedding was perfect. Everyone said they were the perfect couple, but beneath that surface, cracks were forming. Michael worked late most nights. When Catherine suggested he spend more time at home, he'd get defensive, remind her how much money he made, how much pressure he was under. Catherine would apologize and tell herself this was normal for marriage to a successful lawyer. But what Catherine wanted more than anything was a baby. 2 years into their marriage, she stopped asking permission and started insisting. Michael finally agreed with conditions. They'd try for 1 year. 4 months later, Catherine got pregnant. She was euphoric. Michael smiled and hugged her, but something in his eyes was off. At 8 weeks pregnant, Catherine started bleeding. She called Michael from the school bathroom, crying. He said he'd meet her at the hospital. He didn't. She drove herself to the emergency room and heard the words no expecting mother wants to hear. No heartbeat. Miscarriage. Michael came home that night around 9, hugged her, said they'd try again. Then went to his office and made work calls until midnight while Catherine lay bleeding and grieving alone. 6 months later, Catherine got pregnant again. This time she waited until 10 weeks to tell him. His reaction was even more muted. At 13 weeks, she miscarried again. She took a week off work for the first time in her career. She couldn't face her students, couldn't pretend to be okay. Michael suggested therapy, suggested taking a break from trying. Catherine started to notice things she'd been ignoring. The way he flinched when she reached for his hand. The way he spent more time at the office. The way he looked at his phone and smiled at texts he never let her see. Catherine wasn't stupid. She knew what those signs meant, but she was too broken to confront it. A year passed. Catherine made an appointment with a fertility specialist. When the doctor told her about IVF, Catherine felt hope again. She presented the information to Michael like a business proposal. $15,000 per round. He said that was a lot of money. Catherine said she'd been thinking about nothing else. She was 33. She didn't have time to wait. Michael said okay, but just 1 round. The IVF process was brutal. Hormone injections that made her emotional and bloated, constant monitoring appointments. Michael wasn't there for the egg retrieval. They retrieved 18 eggs, 14 fertilized, 5 made it to blastocysts. The embryo transfer happened on a Tuesday morning. Michael had a court appearance. Catherine's mother held her hand instead. The 2-week wait was torture. When the blood test came back, the nurse called with results. Pregnant, very pregnant, HCG levels so high they wanted an early ultrasound. At 6 weeks, the technician paused, looked closer, then smiled. 3 sacs, 3 heartbeats, triplets, a 1 in 10,000 chance. Catherine started crying, happy tears, grateful tears, 3 bobbies after 2 losses and a year of heartbreak. She looked at Michael expecting joy. Instead, he looked terrified, trapped. He suggested selective reduction, terminating 1 or 2 embryos to make the pregnancy safer. Catherine said absolutely not. These were miracles. Michael dropped it, but Catherine knew the truth. He didn't want this. The pregnancy was difficult. Catherine was put on bed rest at 16 weeks. She had to stop working. Michael's work hours got longer. He was never home. When he was home, he was distant, annoyed by Catherine's needs. She felt like a burden. At night, when she couldn't sleep, Catherine started working on something that gave her purpose. An app. An educational app for children with learning disabilities. She noticed a gap in the market for tools that helped kids with dyslexia, ADHD, processing disorders. She started designing lesson plans that could be gamified. She taught herself basic coding through YouTube videos. She spent hours building something from nothing. She named it Story Sprout. One evening, Catherine showed Michael what she'd been working on. She was excited, hoping this would help him see her as more than a pregnant burden. She explained the concept, the market research, the positive feedback from colleagues. Michael glanced at it for maybe 30 seconds, smiled like you smile at a child's crayon drawing, and said, "That's nice, honey, cute little hobby." Catherine felt slapped. A hobby. But she closed her laptop and told herself it didn't matter what he thought. What Catherine didn't know was that Michael had been paying very close attention. While Catherine had been building her app, Michael had been building an exit strategy. A plan to take everything she'd created and leave her with nothing. And he was going to execute that plan at the most vulnerable moment of her entire life. Catherine's due date was September 15th, but triplets rarely make it to term. At 33 weeks on a Tuesday morning, Catherine woke up at 5 with her water broken. She shook Michael awake. He got dressed with mechanical efficiency. No excitement, no reassurance. At the hospital, Catherine was immediately taken to labor and delivery. The bobbies were in distress, heart rates dropping with each contraction. The doctor said they needed an emergency cesarean. In the operating room, Catherine was positioned on the table, arms strapped out to her sides. The spinal block numbed her lower body. Michael sat by her head looking at his phone. In the middle of his wife's emergency surgery, Michael was on his phone. Then Catherine heard it, a cry, baby A, a girl, 3 pounds 12 ounces, whisked away before Catherine could see her. Another cry, baby B, another girl, 3 pounds 9 ounces, then baby C, a boy, 3 pounds 6 ounces. All 3 were immediately taken to the NICU. Catherine couldn't see them, couldn't hold them, couldn't confirm they were real. She asked Michael to check on them. He walked over, looked for maybe 10 seconds, came back and said they looked okay. That was it. Before Michael left the operating room, he told Catherine he needed to make phone calls. She nodded, grateful he was notifying family. He squeezed her hand once and left. Catherine was alone with strangers, counting ceiling tiles to keep from crying. In recovery, a nurse brought photos, tiny fragile things covered in wires. Emma, Oliver, Sophie, they'd need at least a month in the NICU. Michael still wasn't back. 2 hours after delivery, Catherine was wheeled to the NICU. She reached through the porthole and touched Emma's foot, smaller than her thumb. She started crying. The nurse asked where Michael was. She hadn't seen him. Catherine swallowed the lump in her throat. She spent an hour whispering to her bobbies through plastic about how much she loved them, how she'd never let anything hurt them. Promises she meant with every cell in her body. When Catherine was wheeled back to her room, Michael was there, still in scrubs, phone in hand. Asked how she was feeling. She asked if he'd seen the bobbies. He said not yet, he'd been dealing with work stuff. Catherine felt something crack inside her. Work stuff on the day his children were born. Around 2 in the afternoon, Michael said he needed to go home and shower. Catherine asked him to please stop by the NICU first. He said he would, kissed her forehead, and left. A nurse came in 30 minutes later and mentioned she'd seen Catherine's husband leaving. Catherine asked if he'd stopped at the NICU. The nurse checked the visitor log. No, he'd left without meeting his children. Catherine turned her face to the wall and cried. Her mother arrived around 4, rushing in with flowers and tears. She went to the NICU, came back gushing about the bobbies. She asked where Michael was. Catherine said he went home to shower. Her mother's face flashed with anger, quickly suppressed. They didn't talk about Michael. They didn't need to, her mother knew. Michael came back around 7. He showered, changed, looked refreshed. He said he'd stopped by the NICU. Finally, after 12 hours. Catherine asked what he thought. He said they were small. Catherine asked if he'd held them. He said no, they were too fragile. Around 8:30, Michael stood and said he was going home to sleep. Catherine stared at him. He was leaving on the night his children were born. She asked him to stay. He said there was no point, he couldn't do anything to help. She asked again. He said he'd be back in the morning and left. Catherine watched the door close and felt whatever hope she'd been clinging to die. The next morning, Michael showed up around 10 with Starbucks coffee, just one, for himself. He sat down and said he needed to talk about something important. Catherine's stomach dropped. He said he'd been thinking about her app. He'd had his lawyer draw up documents that would clarify ownership if the app ever went anywhere. Just standard stuff to avoid confusion later. Pulled out a folder, multiple documents. He said he needed her to sign them today. Catherine asked what she was signing. Michael said complicated legal language but essentially clarifying that the app was her personal project, separate from marital assets. He made it sound like he was protecting her work. She asked why this couldn't wait. He said the lawyer needed it filed by end of week and they'd be too busy with bobbies once she was home. Catherine tried to read them but the words swam together. Legal jargon she couldn't parse in her exhausted, medicated state. Michael handed her a pen, pointed where to sign. 5 places across 3 documents. Catherine hesitated. Something felt wrong, but Michael was her husband. Why would he hurt her? She signed. All 5 signatures. Michael took the papers and said this would make everything easier. He said he'd run these to his office real quick and be back in an hour. He left with the folder. Catherine sat staring at the door, and for reasons she couldn't articulate, she started crying. Fear tears. The kind your body produces when it knows something terrible has happened but your mind hasn't caught up yet. Michael didn't come back in an hour, didn't come back in 2 hours, didn't come back all day. Catherine called repeatedly. Voicemail. By evening she was panicking. Around 7 her phone rang. Unknown number, hospital security, someone here to see her. Catherine said yes, thinking it was Michael, but a man she'd never seen walked in with a briefcase. Robert Morrison, attorney at law, here to serve her with legal documents. He handed Catherine a manila envelope and left. Catherine opened it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers, filed that afternoon. Petitioner Michael Hayes, respondent Catherine Hayes, requesting sole physical custody of minor children Emma Hayes, Oliver Hayes, and Sophie Hayes. Catherine couldn't breathe. She'd given birth less than 30 hours ago. Her body was torn apart. Her bobbies were fighting for their lives, and her husband had filed for divorce and wanted to take her bobbies. Then she saw it attached to the petition, a copy of what she'd signed that morning. Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement. Catherine Hayes hereby transfers all rights to the educational application known as Story Sprout to Michael Hayes. Transfer is irrevocable and binding. She signed away her app, the thing she'd created during the hardest months of her life. She'd given it to Michael while hooked to an IV, bleeding, traumatized from surgery. And now he was divorcing her and taking her children and taking her work, taking everything. Catherine started screaming. Nurses came running. They found her sobbing hysterically, papers everywhere, her incision bleeding through her gown. They gave her sedatives. They called her mother. But Catherine was beyond comfort. Her entire world had just imploded. Catherine's mother arrived within 30 minutes. She read through the documents with growing horror. She called her lawyer, Patricia Chen, who said she'd come to the hospital first thing, said not to sign anything else, not to communicate with Michael. That night was the longest of Catherine's life. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Michael's face when he'd handed her those papers, the casual deception, the premeditation. He'd planned this for months. Around 3 in the morning, a NICU nurse called to say Sophie was having breathing difficulties. Did Catherine want to come down? Catherine couldn't walk without assistance and no one was available. She said to keep her updated. She hung up and cried because she couldn't even be there for her child in distress. The next morning, Patricia Chen arrived at 7 with a briefcase and a no-nonsense attitude. She went through every document with Catherine. The divorce petition was standard. The custody demand was aggressive. Michael claimed Catherine was emotionally unstable, that her miscarriages had caused psychological damage, that she wasn't in a mental state to care for premature infants. Every vulnerable moment Catherine had shared, he'd twisted into evidence of her unfitness. Patricia said they'd fight it. Then Patricia picked up the IP transfer agreement. She read it 3 times. She said this was complicated. The signature was valid, properly formatted and witnessed. But the circumstances were questionable. Signing complex legal documents less than 24 hours after major surgery, on pain medication, without counsel, potentially under duress, could be grounds to challenge it. But challenges were expensive and success wasn't guaranteed. Patricia asked Catherine to explain what Story Sprout was. Catherine explained. An educational app for children with learning disabilities. Interactive modules for reading, math, focus exercises, all based on her teaching experience. She designed the interface, written the content, taught herself coding. She tested it with former students and got incredible feedback. She planned to launch a beta version after the Bobbies were born, maybe run a Kickstarter to help with medical bills. She thought maybe she could make a few $1,000s. Patricia asked if anyone knew about the app. Catherine said her friend Lisa, a patent attorney who'd offered to help with trademark filing. Patricia asked if Lisa had filed anything. Catherine said no, she'd been too overwhelmed. Patricia asked if Michael knew about Lisa's offer. Catherine thought back. Yes, Michael had been there when Lisa mentioned it. He'd asked questions about filing timelines and ownership rights. At the time, Catherine thought he was being supportive. Now she realized he'd been gathering intelligence. Patricia said they needed to talk to Lisa immediately. Catherine called Lisa, barely got 3 sentences out before crying. Lisa said she'd be there within the hour. Lisa arrived and immediately pulled out her laptop, searching patent and trademark databases. Her face went pale. The trademark had been filed 3 days ago. Applicant Michael Hayes. Lisa searched deeper. 3 patent applications, all filed in the last week, all listing Michael Hayes as sole inventor, all describing Catherine's work. Michael had stolen everything. And because Catherine signed the IP transfer, he had documentation that she'd given it willingly. Lisa said they might be able to fight this. Prove Catherine created the work before the transfer, demonstrate coercion and fraud. Show Michael had no expertise in education, but it would require resources. Money Catherine didn't have. Patricia said she could take the divorce case pro bono, but the IP case would need a specialist, tens of thousands in retainer fees. Catherine said she barely had 10,000. Lisa said she'd make some calls, see if colleagues might help, but they couldn't count on charity. Patricia said first priority was custody. If Michael got custody, Catherine lost everything that mattered. They scheduled an emergency custody hearing for the following week. Catherine was discharged Friday, 4 days after giving birth. She could barely walk. Her incision was still oozing, but insurance wouldn't pay for another night. Her mother drove her home to the house she'd shared with Michael. It was half empty. Michael had taken his things: clothes, toiletries, furniture, the couch, the kitchen table. Catherine stood in the empty living room feeling the full weight of her reality, alone, in debt, recovering from surgery, 3 Bobbies in the NICU, and a legal battle ahead with no resources to fight. That first week home was a blur of pain and pumping and phone calls. Catherine had to pump every 3 hours. The pump was torture, her body producing barely enough milk for 1 baby, let alone 3. Her mother would drive the milk to the NICU twice a day. Catherine couldn't drive. She called the NICU every 4 hours for updates. Emma was doing best. Oliver was stable. Sophie was struggling, had developed an infection. Catherine felt like the worst mother in the world. Michael didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask about the Bobbies. His lawyer sent an email with a proposed custody schedule. Michael wanted the Bobbies once discharged. He allow Catherine every other weekend with supervision she'd have to pay for. The email made her physically ill. The day before the custody hearing, Catherine forced herself to go to the NICU. She sat between the incubators and sobbed. A NICU nurse named Diane sat beside her and spoke quietly. She said she'd seen parents in crisis. Catherine wasn't in crisis because of anything she'd done wrong. She was in crisis because someone had done something terribly wrong to her. Diane said Catherine's Bobbies knew their mother. They were waiting for her to fight. Catherine asked how with no money, no energy, no power. Diane said the same way every mother fights, with everything she had. That night, Catherine sat up with her laptop documenting everything. Every file she created for Story Sprout, every timestamp. She found old emails showing Michael early prototypes, receiving dismissive responses, text messages to friends describing her progress, teaching notebooks with sketches and ideas. Over 300 files proving Story Sprout was her creation. The custody hearing was brutal. Michael's attorney painted Catherine as mentally unstable, obsessed with motherhood, potentially dangerous. He cited her miscarriages as psychological fragility. He said she'd been hospitalized, neglecting to mention it was for childbirth. He said Michael was concerned for the children's safety given Catherine's erratic behavior in the hospital, referring to the night she'd been sedated after being served divorce papers. When Patricia's turn came, she presented Catherine's teaching career with exemplary reviews, letters from colleagues, medical records showing the miscarriages were physiological. The timeline of Michael's actions: filing divorce hours after Catherine gave birth, serving them during recovery, never visiting his children in the NICU. Patricia said Michael's claim of concern was contradicted by his complete absence from their lives. Then Patricia said they had evidence Michael defrauded Catherine into signing away intellectual property while incapacitated. She said Michael's entire divorce filing was motivated by financial gain, not concern for children. She requested a full investigation. Judge Melendez asked Michael directly, "Have you visited your children in the NICU since their birth 9 days ago?" Michael said he'd been busy with work, in communication with medical staff, ensuring bills were paid. The judge asked again, "How many times physically?" Michael said twice. The judge asked Catherine, "Every day since she was physically able, 6 of the 9 days." The judge made a note. She wasn't making a final custody determination today. He ordered a custody evaluation by a court psychologist. Both parents would undergo testing interviews. In the interim, temporary joint legal custody with Catherine as primary physical custodian once children were discharged. Michael would have supervised visitation twice weekly. He'd pay child support and half of medical expenses. It wasn't total victory, but Catherine had her Bobbies, for now. As they left, Michael looked at Catherine, just for a second, cold calculation. He wasn't done. Outside, Patricia said they'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. The custody evaluation would take months. Meanwhile, they needed to figure out the IP situation. Lisa was waiting in the parking lot. She had news. She'd found an IP attorney willing to take Catherine's case. David Chen, Patricia's ex-husband, partner at a major tech law firm specializing in fraud. He hated bullies. When Lisa told him about Catherine's situation, he'd agreed to take it on contingency. 30% if they won, nothing if they lost. Catherine agreed. That evening, Catherine sat in her empty house and allowed herself one moment of hope. She had legal representation, temporary custody, evidence. Then her phone rang, unknown number. A man named Marcus Wu, senior partner at Innovate Capital, a venture capital firm. He said he'd been in discussions with Michael Hayes about investing in Story Sprout. During due diligence, questions arose about the true origins of the application. His team found evidence much of the work was created by Michael's wife. Before moving forward, they needed clarity on ownership. He was calling to ask Catherine directly. Did she create Story Sprout? Catherine's heart pounded. She said yes. Every single piece. Marcus Wu was quiet. Then he said he thought so. Michael's pitch had been polished but hollow. When asked detailed questions about pedagogical methodology and special education law, he'd fumbled. Marcus said if Catherine could provide documentation proving authorship, his firm would be very interested in speaking with her about investment. Not with Michael, with her. Catherine said she had documentation. Marcus said he'd send over an NDA. He said one more thing. His son had severe dyslexia, struggled for years. They'd tried everything. Then they found a teacher who helped him understand his brain wasn't broken, just different. That teacher changed his son's life. When Marcus saw the Story Sprout prototype, he thought about that teacher, about how the world needed more tools like this, more people who understood how to reach kids who learned differently. He said if Catherine really created this, she was one of those people, and people like her deserved to be supported, not stolen from. He hung up. Catherine sat holding the phone, tears streaming. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone believed her. Someone saw through Michael's lies. Someone wanted to help. It wasn't justice yet, but it was a crack in the armor. The next 3 months were the hardest of Catherine's life. The Bobbies came home one at a time over 6 weeks. Emma first at 5 weeks old, Oliver 2 weeks later, Sophie last after 8 weeks in the NICU, multiple infections, coming home on oxygen. Catherine was caring for 3 infants with complex medical needs completely alone. Feeding 3 Bobbies every 3 hours meant she fed constantly. She never slept more than 90 minutes. She lost 20 pounds in 2 months. She developed mastitis twice, but she kept going because what choice did she have? Michael came for supervised visits. Twice weekly, a woman named Gloria watched while Michael held his children awkwardly for 2 hours. He didn't change diapers, didn't prepare bottles, didn't soothe them when they cried. Catherine stayed in her bedroom because she couldn't watch. The custody evaluation was invasive. Dr. Rebecca Morrison came to Catherine's house multiple times, watched her care for the Bobbies, asked hundreds of questions. Catherine answered honestly. She also showed Dr. Morrison her systems, feeding charts, medication schedules, well-baby records showing all 3 thriving. Dr. Morrison also evaluated Michael at his new downtown loft. Patricia's investigator found interesting details. Michael had moved in with his girlfriend Jennifer, the affair partner. 28, worked in marketing, no children. The investigator got photos of them at restaurants, laughing and holding hands while Michael's premature Bobbies were home fighting for breath. Patricia said judges didn't look kindly on parents who abandoned newborns for affair partners. Meanwhile, Catherine was working with David Chen on the IP case. David took Catherine's documentation and built an irrefutable timeline. Catherine had started developing Story Sprout 2 years ago. She had dated files, emails describing progress, early screenshots, research papers with her notes, everything. David subpoenaed Michael's computer files. It took a court order, but they got access. What they found was damning. Michael had no files related to Story Sprout before 8 months ago. The only thing he had were copies of Catherine's files, clearly transferred from her computer. He'd literally stolen her work file by file. David found something else. Email correspondence between Michael and Marcus Wu. The emails started 5 months ago during Catherine's pregnancy. Michael had pitched himself as an ed-tech entrepreneur with a revolutionary application. He'd sent Catherine's prototype, business plan, market research, all under his name. The emails showed Marcus Wu's firm was impressed. They were discussing a term sheet. $23 million for 30% equity. $23 million. Michael had been negotiating while Catherine was on bed rest, vulnerable and trusting. David found the smoking gun in an email Michael sent to a friend dated 3 weeks before Catherine gave birth. Michael wrote, "The company is almost ready to close. Once I get the IP transfer locked down, we're good to go. Just need to time it right. Can't have her thinking clearly when she signs. Waiting until after delivery. She'll be out of it. Pain meds, exhaustion, the whole deal. She'll sign anything. Then I file for divorce, get out clean and cash in. She gets nothing. I get everything. It's almost too easy." David showed Catherine the email. She read it 3 times. Each time felt like being punched. Michael had written out his entire plan. The timing, the deception, the exploitation. He thought it was easy. Catherine asked what they could do with this. David smiled. They were going to destroy Michael's case. This email proved fraud, emotional distress, coercion. It invalidated the IP transfer completely, but more, it was evidence of moral character. Patricia could use it in custody. David filed an emergency motion to void the IP transfer, attached the email as Exhibit A. Michael's lawyers went into panic mode, arguing the email was taken out of context. But the email was clear. There was no explaining it away. Before they got to court, Marcus Wu called Catherine again. He'd been following the case through public records. He'd seen the email. His firm was pulling out of any deal with Michael. Fraud was a deal breaker. Reputation was everything. Michael's reputation was toxic, but Marcus said if the IP transfer was voided, if Catherine regained ownership, Innovate Capital wanted to talk to her about investment. Same terms. $23 million for 30% equity. Maybe more depending on beta testing. He said his firm believed in the product. They just wanted to do business with the actual creator, not a thief. Catherine could barely process it. Marcus was offering her the deal Michael tried to steal. The same deal. She asked what she needed to do. Marcus said first win the legal case, get the IP back. Then they'd move forward. He'd wait. Good investments were worth waiting for. The emergency hearing happened on a Tuesday. Catherine dressed in her nicest outfit. Patricia and David accompanied her. Michael was there with 3 lawyers. The judge was Thomas Warren, known for his no-nonsense approach. David presented his case methodically. Timeline, documentation, the email. Judge Warren read it silently. His expression darkened. He asked Michael's lawyers to respond. They tried. They argued the email was hyperbole, that Michael had contributed to development, that the IP transfer was valid because Catherine signed of her own free will. Judge Warren stopped them mid-sentence. Are you seriously arguing that a contract signed by a woman less than 24 hours after major surgery on narcotic pain medication, without counsel based on misrepresentations, is valid? The lawyer said the law didn't have a provision for buyer's remorse. Judge Warren said this wasn't buyer's remorse. This was fraud, textbook fraud. The email proved intent to deceive. He didn't need to hear anything else. The IP transfer agreement was void. All rights to StorySprout reverted to Catherine Hayes immediately. Michael's face went white. David requested sanctions, reimbursement of legal fees, damages. Judge Warren said he'd issue a written order but was inclined to grant them. As they left, Michael tried to approach Catherine. Patricia stepped between them. Michael said Catherine was making a huge mistake, that she'd never launch the app without his help. Catherine looked at him and said the only words she'd spoken to him since he'd served those papers. I understand you're a liar and a thief, and you're going to lose everything. Then she walked away. Judge Warren's order came 4 days later. He voided the IP transfer, awarded Catherine all rights to StorySprout, ordered Michael to return all files, sanctioned Michael and his legal team $50,000, ordered Michael to reimburse Catherine's legal fees $90,000, and referred Michael's conduct to the state bar for investigation. Total victory. The same week, Dr. Morrison submitted her custody evaluation. Patricia called Catherine, her voice gleeful. The report recommended Catherine retain primary physical custody, with Michael having only supervised visitation. Dr. Morrison wrote Michael showed limited attachment to the children and concerning prioritization of personal relationships and financial interests over parental responsibilities. She wrote Catherine, despite enormous stress and limited resources, had created a stable, loving environment for 3 medically complex infants. The report eviscerated Michael's claim. Judge Melendez scheduled a final custody hearing. That hearing was anticlimactic. Michael's lawyer barely fought. Judge Melendez granted Catherine sole physical custody. Michael got supervised visitation every other weekend for 4 hours. He had to pay substantial child support. The judge said she'd review in a year to see if Michael had stepped up, making clear she had doubts. Catherine walked out knowing her bobbies were safe. Michael couldn't take them. They were hers. Finally, legally, irrevocably hers. Catherine met with Marcus Wu and his team at Innovate Capital's San Francisco offices. Glass walls, expensive art, views of the bay. Catherine brought David and Lisa. Catherine presented StorySprout, showed the prototype, walked them through her teaching methodology and research, showed testimonials from parents, presented her business plan with projections and market analysis. The partners asked hard questions about scalability and user acquisition. Catherine answered every question. She knew her product, she knew her market. She lived this work for years. Marcus Wu smiled. They were prepared to offer Catherine $23 million for 25% equity improved terms. They wanted her to be CEO. They'd help her build a team, navigate the business side, but this was her company, her vision, her leadership. Catherine asked for a moment to discuss with her advisors. In the next room, Lisa grabbed her hands. This is it. This is everything you worked for. Catherine said, I have 3 6-month-old Bobbies at home. How am I supposed to run a company? David said, you hire help. You build a team. You do what every working mother does. You figure it out. Lisa said, you don't have to decide everything today. Sign the term sheet. Use funding to hire a COO for day-to-day operations. You be the visionary. Catherine thought about Michael saying her app was a cute hobby, about him stealing her work, about everything he'd tried to take. She thought about taking it all back. They went back into the main conference room. Catherine said yes, papers would be drawn up. Due diligence would continue, but they had a deal. On the way out, Lisa said, do you realize what you've done? You just became a multimillionaire. Catherine said, the money doesn't even feel real. What feels real is that Michael didn't win. Lisa said, Michael didn't just not win. Michael lost everything. And you gained everything. That's not just justice. That's poetry. The news about the investment broke 3 weeks later. TechCrunch ran the story. $23 million seed round for educational technology startup founded by elementary school teacher Catherine Hayes. The article was glowing, inspiring, triumph over adversity. Teacher becomes entrepreneur. Mother of premature triplets builds multi-million-dollar company. The article mentioned, almost as a footnote, that Catherine's soon-to-be ex-husband had attempted to claim ownership, but courts ruled in Catherine's favor after finding fraud. Michael's name was attached to the word fraud, for anyone who Googled him, for the San Diego legal community. His reputation was destroyed. The state bar investigation moved quickly. They reviewed the case files, the email, interviewed witnesses. 3 months later, they filed formal charges against Michael Hayes for violations including dishonesty, fraud, and misrepresentation. He was facing disbarment. The law firm where he'd worked 7 years fired him. The negative publicity was bad for business. Michael became a liability. He was unemployed, facing disbarment, paying massive child support and legal fees, watching his ex-wife become a millionaire using the work he tried to steal. The relationship with Jennifer fell apart. She was interested in dating a successful attorney, not an unemployed, disbarred lawyer drowning in debt. She moved out and blocked his number. Catherine heard about Michael's downfall through her lawyer and the grapevine. Part of her felt satisfied, but mostly she felt tired of thinking about him, tired of hating him, tired of letting him take up space in her head. She had a company to build. Catherine used funding to hire a nanny, a wonderful woman named Rosa. Rosa came 5 days a week, giving Catherine time to work. Catherine hired a chief operating officer named Jennifer Park with 15 years ed-tech experience. Jennifer took over business operations while Catherine focused on product development. They hired developers, a marketing team, rented office space. StorySprout officially launched in beta 6 months after investment closed. The response was overwhelming. Parents of children with learning disabilities had been waiting for this. Teachers shared it. School districts reached out about licensing. Within 3 months, 50,000 active users. Within 6 months, 200,000. The app was free with optional premium features. The conversion rate was higher than projected. Real revenue started coming in. The company was thriving. Catherine was featured in magazines, podcasts, news segments, invited to speak at conferences. People wanted to hear her story, how she'd created the app while bedridden, how her husband tried to steal it, how she fought back and won. Catherine was always careful to focus on the positive in interviews. She talked about supporting teacher entrepreneurs, about the gap in resources for children with learning differences, her vision for the future. But she didn't hide what happened. When asked about the fraud case, she answered honestly. She said, "Yes, my ex-husband tried to steal my work. Yes, he exploited me at my most vulnerable. Yes, I had to fight in court. And yes, I won." She said she wanted women to know they could fight back, that they could win, that justice was possible. The custody situation stabilized. Michael showed up for supervised visits sporadically, then less and less as novelty wore off. After 6 months, he was missing more visits than he attended. Catherine documented every missed visit. At the one-year review, Judge Melendez looked at the records. Michael's visitation would remain supervised but reduced to once monthly. If he missed 3 consecutive visits, she'd consider terminating his rights. Michael missed the next 3. Catherine's lawyer filed a motion to terminate parental rights. Michael didn't show up for the hearing. The judge granted the motion. Michael was no longer legally the father of Emma, Oliver, and Sophie. He had no rights, no obligations beyond child support he was already behind on. He was simply gone. Catherine thought she'd feel something when it happened, but she felt nothing. He'd already been gone. The legal paperwork just made it official. Emma, Oliver, and Sophie thrived. By their first birthday, they'd caught up developmentally. Sophie was off oxygen. All 3 were walking, babbling, laughing. They had no memory of the NICU, no memory of their father. They just knew their mother and their grandmother and Rosa and the safe, loving home Catherine had created. On their first birthday, Catherine threw a party at her new house, not the house she'd shared with Michael. She'd moved and bought a bigger house with a backyard and play set, a house with no bad memories. Friends came. Family. Former colleagues, Lisa, David Chen, even Marcus Wu. At the end, after everyone left and the Bobbies were asleep, Catherine sat on her porch with wine and looked at the stars. She thought about where she'd been a year ago, in a hospital bed, in the worst pain of her life, being handed divorce papers, signing away her future without knowing it, losing everything. And she thought about where she was now, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, sole parent to 3 healthy children, owner of a beautiful home. Surrounded by people who loved her, free from a man who'd seen her as nothing but an obstacle. She'd lost everything, and then she'd built something better from the ashes. StorySprout's success continued. By the end of the 2nd year, over 1 million users. They'd expanded beyond learning disabilities to offer content for all children while maintaining their accessibility focus. They partnered with school districts nationwide. They won awards for educational innovation. Catherine raised a Series A round, $50 million at a $300 million valuation. She owned 60% even after dilution. She was worth, on paper, $180 million, but the money wasn't the point. The point was the emails from parents, thousands of them. Parents saying StorySprout had changed their child's life, that their dyslexic son was reading, that their daughter with ADHD could focus, that their autistic child had found a way to engage with learning. Those emails made everything worth it. All the sleepless nights and legal battles and fear and pain. Worth it because she'd created something that helped children. Which was all she'd ever wanted. 3 years after the divorce was finalized, Catherine was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline read, "From Teacher to Tech Titan, How Catherine Hayes Built a $300 million company While Fighting for Her Children." The article detailed her entire journey, the fertility struggles, the triplets, the betrayal, the legal battles, the comeback. 6 pages with photos of Catherine in her office with her children visiting a classroom using StorySprout. The journalist asked if she'd ever heard from Michael Hayes. Catherine said no, and she didn't expect to. Asked if she'd forgiven him, Catherine thought about it. She said forgiveness was complicated. She didn't forgive what he'd done, the cruelty of his timing and calculation of his theft, but she'd stopped letting it hurt her. She stopped giving him power over her emotions. She moved on, which was different from forgiveness but maybe just as important. The article included a sidebar about Michael. He'd been disbarred as expected, worked as a paralegal for a while but got fired. He'd moved to Arizona, away from the San Diego community. He'd remarried quickly to a woman he met online. They had a child together. Catherine's lawyer confirmed he was behind on child support by over $200,000. Catherine had the resources to pursue the debt aggressively, but chose not to. The garnishment from his wages was automatic. She'd get whatever she'd get. She wasn't going to spend time or energy chasing him for money she no longer needed. Some people said Catherine was too soft on Michael, that she should have pursued him harder made him suffer more. But Catherine didn't see it that way. She'd already won. She won in every way that mattered. Her children were healthy. Her company was successful. Her life was full and meaningful. Michael was the one who'd lost. He'd lost his career, reputation, children, the wealth he'd been so desperate for. He'd gambled everything on a scheme to steal from Catherine, and it cost him everything. She didn't need to punish him further. His choices had already punished him. The Forbes article ended with a quote from Catherine. "I tell my children when they're old enough to understand that bad things will happen in life. People will hurt you. Circumstances will knock you down. But you always have a choice in how you respond. You can stay down and let the pain define you. Or you can stand up and decide who you're going to be despite the pain. I chose to stand up, and I hope I'm teaching them to do the same." The article went viral, millions of shares. Catherine received speaking invitations from around the world. TED wanted her. Major universities wanted her for commencement. She did some, the ones she felt passionate about, but mostly she focused on her company and her children. Because at the end of the day, those were the things that mattered. Not fame. Not revenge. Just the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful and raising 3 children who'd never doubt their mother's love. 5 years after that day in the hospital, Emma, Oliver, and Sophie started kindergarten. 3 5-year-olds with different personalities but the same bright eyes and curious minds. Emma was the leader, bold and outgoing. Oliver was the gentle one, quiet and thoughtful. Sophie, the smallest who'd fought the hardest, was the most resilient. Nothing scared her. Nothing stopped her. On the first day, Catherine walked all 3 children to their separate classrooms. The school believed in separating multiples to help them develop individual identities. Emma marched into her classroom without looking back. Oliver hesitated, gripped Catherine's hand tight, then took a breath and walked in. Sophie kissed Catherine's cheek and ran in like she'd been waiting her whole life. Catherine stood in the hallway watching through windows as her Bobbies, not Bobbies anymore, settled into their new environments. Catherine drove from the school to her office. Story Sprout now employed over 200 people in a building they owned outright. Catherine's office had windows overlooking the bay. Photos of her children covered every surface. The company was preparing for an IPO, initial public offering. They'd filed paperwork with the SEC. Financial analysts projected Story Sprout would be valued at over $1 billion. Catherine would be a billionaire. On paper. 5 years ago, she'd been wondering how to pay medical bills. Now she was going to be a billionaire. She hired a financial advisor to manage the wealth responsibly, set up trusts for the children, donate to causes she believed in, fund scholarships, support teachers. She created a foundation in her children's names providing grants to NICU families struggling with medical debt, because she remembered sitting in that hospital not knowing how to pay bills while her Bobbies fought for their lives. During lunch, Catherine got an email from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line: "Congratulations on the IPO." She almost deleted it, but something made her open it. The email was from Michael, the first contact in 5 years. "Catherine, I saw the news about Story Sprout going public. Congratulations. I know we didn't end things well. I know I hurt you. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I did and I'm not proud of it. I was ambitious in the worst way and I hurt people I should have protected. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I regret how everything happened. I hope you're doing well. I hope the kids are healthy. I think about them sometimes. I know I have no right to, but I do. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry and congratulations. You deserved all of this success, more than I ever did. Michael." Catherine read the email 3 times. She felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction at his apology, no desire to respond. No desire for reconciliation, just nothing. She moved so far past what he'd done that even his apology felt irrelevant. She closed the email without responding. Maybe that made her cold. Maybe she should have acknowledged his attempt at amends. But she didn't owe him anything, not forgiveness, not absolution, not even a reply. He'd made his choices. She made hers. They'd both live with the consequences. That evening, Catherine picked up her children. Each one came running with artwork and stories. Emma had made two new best friends. Oliver had discovered the classroom library. Sophie had told her teacher she was going to be an astronaut. In the car, the three of them talked over each other, excited voices filling the space, and Catherine felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what mattered, not Michael's apology, not the IPO, not money or fame or success. These three children who existed against all odds, who survived everything, who were loved completely by a mother who'd fought for them. That night, after dinner and baths and stories, after the children were asleep, Catherine poured wine and sat in her office. She pulled up the files from Story Sprout's early development, the original sketches while on bed rest, the first code at 3 a.m., the lesson plans adapted from her teaching, all of it still there, evidence of her creation, proof this had always been hers. She thought about emailing Michael back. But in the end, she closed her laptop. Some things didn't need a response. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Story Sprout went public 3 months later. The IPO was successful beyond projections. Stock opened at $48 per share and closed at 62. The company was valued at $1.3 billion. Catherine was worth $800 million. She rang the opening bell at NASDAQ with Emma, Oliver, and Sophie beside her. The photo of the four of them appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Headline: Teacher Mom Rings in 1.3 IPO for Learning App. It was surreal. Catherine had started with an idea, a laptop, and a desperate need for meaning during the darkest period of her life. And that idea had become this: a company, a movement, a resource helping millions of children. She'd done it while pregnant, while recovering from surgery, while fighting for custody, while battling fraud in court, while learning to be a single mother to triplets. She'd done it without the person who should have been her partner. And despite that person actively trying to sabotage her. If someone had told her 5 years ago, as she lay in that hospital bed holding divorce papers, that this was where she'd end up, she wouldn't have believed them. She couldn't have imagined feeling anything but pain. But pain doesn't last forever. Not if you don't let it. Catherine had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. She'd taken her betrayal and turned it into motivation. She'd taken the worst moment of her life and built from it something extraordinary, not despite what Michael did, but in defiant response to it. He tried to take everything. She built everything anyway. So what happens when someone tries to destroy you at your most vulnerable moment? When they exploit your trust and your pain and your love for their own gain? When they leave you with nothing but 3 premature babies and a mountain of debt and a heart broken into pieces so small you think they can never be put back together? You have 2 choices. You can let them win, or you can fight back. Catherine fought back, and she won. Not just in court, not just in business, but in life. She built a life worth living. She raised children who would never know their mother as a victim, only as a fighter, as someone who fell down and stood back up. As someone who lost everything and built something better. That's the legacy she's giving them. Not money, but the knowledge that they come from strength, that their mother refused to be defeated, that when the world tried to break her, she became unbreakable. Emma, Oliver, and Sophie will grow up hearing this story. How they were born in crisis. How their father tried to take them and their mother wouldn't let him. How their mother created something from nothing while caring for them. They'll hear it and understand they are miracles, that they were wanted, that they were worth fighting for. And hopefully when they face their own challenges, their own betrayals, their own moments of crisis, they'll remember their mother's story. And they'll fight too. Before we end, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Catherine's situation? Would you have found the strength to fight back? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone tried to destroy it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, inspired you, reminded you of your own strength, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the single mothers fighting impossible battles. Share it with the women who have been betrayed by people they trusted most. Share it with anyone who needs a reminder they can survive anything and come out stronger. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you stories like this every week. Real stories about real people who faced impossible situations and found a way through. Stories that remind us we're all more resilient than we think. Stories that prove sometimes the people who try to destroy us actually just reveal our own power. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Because next week we're bringing you something even more shocking. The story of a woman who discovered her husband's secret second family at her own daughter's wedding reception. How did she find out? What did she do? And what happened to the husband who'd been living two separate lives for 15 years? You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember this. You are stronger than your worst day. You are more than what happened to you. And you have the power to rewrite your story no matter how badly someone else tried to write your ending. Catherine Hayes proved that. And so can you.